Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And kicking off episode 12, I'm speaking about the Jedi Fallen Order comic, Dark Temple. Now, just to clarify, this comic is a prequel to the game, Jedi Fallen Order. I have completed the game, it is amazing, but I will not be saying any spoilers or anything like that in there. There will be a couple of links to the game, because obviously it's the prequel of the game, so people who've played the game will enjoy it, and people who haven't played the game will still get a bit out of it, but I just want to clarify there won't be any major spoilers for Fallen Order. So before I get into the narrative and things, I'll give a bit of information about the comics. So there are 5 issues of this comic, good old mini-series, one of my favourites, and issue number 1 came out in September of 2019, and issue number 5 came out in December of 2019. There's no annual out as of yet, which will be the 5 of them in a collection, but that's due for release around September 2020, but it may get delayed, but should be by the end of this year. And for clarity, the game Fallen Order was out on November 15th, 2019. So this comic, I believe, had 3 or 4 issues out around the time the game was released, and the last issue was not released until after the game had come out. These 5 issues were written by Matthew Rosenberg, the colourist is Arif Prianto, and the artist is Paolo Villanelli. But also, issue number 5 also had another artist on there as well as Paolo, which was Ruairí Coleman. Apologies if I mispronounced that name. Now, this comic features Cere Junda Eno Cordova. Cere Junda is one of the people who guides Cal Kestis, the main character of Fallen Order. She guides him throughout the game quite a lot, and Eno Cordova was her master, and you see quite a few holograms of him, and he has a droid called BD-1 that has loads of holograms of him telling you about ancient temples and things like that. So this explores Cere Junda's relationship with her master Eno Cordova, as well as just a bit more background on the characters themselves. Now I'll give you a couple of things just to do with the general timeline of Star Wars. As I often say, BBY, ABY, all of these things are going to be BBY, which is before the Battle of Yavin. The Battle of Yavin was in A New Hope. So that's how we as humans outside of the universe of Star Wars view the calendar, rather than using all the in-universe calendars, because that just gets a bit too complicated. So for clarity, this comic was set before 40 BBY. It's around that time because there's a Jedi Master in there, Paolo Donation, who was on the council, and he actually left in 40 BBY. And so you can see him a little bit in the background. And funnily enough, the book I'm reading at the moment, Master and Apprentice, talks about that a little bit. So it was quite cool that just kind of happened to marry up. So the comic's before 40 BBY. Then Order 66, shown in Revenge of the Sith, was 19 BBY. And Fallen Order was 14 BBY, which is 5 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith. The exact ages of Cere Junda and Eno Cordova aren't exactly known, but by estimations and things, Cere Junda in Fallen Order the game is around 45, maybe 50 years old, and so in the comics she's around 20, so she's around the age in this comic, a bit older than Cal Kestis was, and a bit younger than Obi-Wan was in Phantom Menace. And for clarity, Phantom Menace was 32 years BBY, so this comic probably happened around 10 years before the events of Phantom Menace. And the last thing before going into the comic is that Eno Cordova in the game itself, once again this isn't going to be a spoiler, but he basically had a force vision at some point before Order 66 of something like Order 66 happening. It didn't explain explicitly, but it said basically he saw the fall of the Jedi Order and a lot of bad things happening. So what he did in the game is he hid a holocron with the names of Jedi children in it, which is what in the Clone Wars, in one of the earlier seasons, there is an episode about a holocron. I think it's called Holocron Heist, actually. And it was about, I think it was Cad Bane trying to steal the holocron, which has the list of all the Force-sensitive children in the universe that the Jedi know about. So the Jedi normally, go find a young Force-sensitive child. Ahsoka Tano from the Clone Wars, I think she was about 3 or 4 when Plo Koon found her. And then they speak to the parents and basically take them to the Jedi Temple to get trained in things in the Jedi ways. In the Vader comic, the second run of them, Dark Lord of the Sith, by Charles Soule, which I'll be going into at some point at a later episode, in that there is also another copy of the holocron with children's names on it and things. So the Jedi archivist Jocasta Nu, who is seen in Attack of the Clones when Obi-Wan goes into the archives and says, oh, there should be a planet here and things, and she's like, well, if the planet is not on our records, it does not exist. Hopefully that impression will give you an impression of who she was. In the comics, she has a bit more information and things, not necessarily in this one, but there is a Vader comic that speaks about the Jedi holocron as well. It's not the same holocron. Jocasta Nu made a copy of it, to my knowledge, for the one shown in Fallen Order. So with this comic, the layout is quite interesting with these comics. The first 4 comics has got a couple of pages of this sort of intro, which is basically taking place just before Fallen Order by like what seems like maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of days, whereas the air quotes main story, which appears technically as a flashback, but it is the main plot of these stories, that is the one which I've said about is, 10 years or so before Phantom Menace. So I'm going to try my best to explain it better when I'm saying the narrative specifically, but I want to clarify that the start of each comic there is like a kind of what's happening at present and then shows what happened back then to make these events happen. So there's 2 main planets mentioned in these comics. The first one is Namil, which is very early on in the first comic and is only for a few pages, like a little intro-y sort of thing. And then there's also the planet Ontotho, which is the main planet within this comic series. From what I can find online, neither of them have been mentioned in canon before, so they have been created for this comic specifically. So it starts with Cere Junda, the Padawan of the Jedi Master Eno Cordova. They're on this planet Namil, and they speak to some Trandoshans. Trandoshans are lizard people, essentially. There's a bounty hunter in Empire Strikes Back called Bosk. He is one of the more famous of the lesser-known bounty hunters, apart from Boba Fett. He is also, I think, in Star Wars Battlefront 2, and he's in quite a lot of other pieces of content, including the Clone Wars. So Trandoshans are these kind of big lizard people, for lack of a better way of describing them. Cere Junda's on this planet with Eno Cordova, and they're basically trying to settle some dispute between some monks and these Trandoshans. Things get a bit heated, and so Eno speaks to the monks themselves to sort of clarify things. Cere just stays with the Trandoshans and tries to sort of speak with them. There's a translator droid there as well because she can't speak Trandoshan and seemingly they can't speak common tongue either. And basically a couple of Trandoshans start to kind of fight and squabble. Cere gets involved, ends up stopping this sort of ritual thing where, 2 warriors face off against each other and it becomes this honor thing. She got involved with that and they all start trying to fight her and things, and she is quite ready to do it. She's saying, the Jedi way says I shouldn't really start a fight, but as soon as they pull out a blaster, she's like, well, you got your blasters out now I can get you with a lightsaber. Now, she doesn't quite do an Anakin and just slaughter all of them. She does just, to what it seems, just destroy most of their blasters with her lightsaber and kind of incapacitate them by, hurting them a little bit. I think there might be a point where she did cut off like a hand or something like that, but she doesn't do any mortal killing damage to what I can tell. That happens, and then Cordova comes out and he says, I figured out what's happened. It's basically the monks stole from the Trandoshans. That's what's causing all of this. And then Cere's there like, so these guys were in the right and basically standing in front of a pile of about 10 to 20 of them. So she's quite brash as a Padawan straight from the starting line. They go back to the Jedi Temple and they speak with the Jedi Council. Yoda's there, Jocasta Nu is there, that Jedi I mentioned earlier, Poli Dapetian, if I'm pronouncing it right. He's there as well as Mace Windu and things. They break down the mission and it basically comes to Cere acted too impulsively, although, is like, well, in the way of the Force, we're meant to kind of follow our instincts and things. They said, we can kind of see that, and because of the situation was a bit more complicated, because something about the monks were trying to trade for weapons with the Trandoshans or something along those lines. It's not specifically relevant, but they say, look, it's a bit more complicated, just kind of be a bit more careful next time, and here's your next mission. So the mission is to go to the planet Ontotho, which I mentioned previously, because there's a temple there, and Eno Cordova is incredibly interested in Jedi temples and any kind of old temples. This one isn't a specific Jedi temple, it's just a old temple, seemingly, but it transpires that it may be a Zepho temple. Now, if you haven't played the Fallen Order games, Zepho will probably mean nothing to you, but the Jedi Fallen Order, a lot of the gameplay is about going around tombs or temples of the Zepho, which are an ancient species who were Force sensitive, and their civilization seemed to have basically kind of destroyed itself in some way. I don't want to delve too far into that because Jedi Fallen Order explains it quite nicely in things, but it's really, really cool to have these connections in there. So they get told there's a temple, not a Jedi temple, just an old temple on this planet. They say the Republic is basically now aligned with the people of Ontotho, and they want to go there and check out the temple, see what's going on there. And basically, Ontotho is sort of split. The majority of the planet is aligned with the Republic, but there's an area which is Phylar, and they class themselves as independent from the rest of the planet, and therefore did not want to be involved with the Republic. So this obviously is causing some degree of friction, especially because the temple that Cere and Eno go to check is on Phylar. They speak with a gentleman called Dilanto Dar, D-A-A. He is the chairman of the Dar Corporation, and essentially they are aligned with the Ontotho people, trying to help them with a few things here and there, and they really want to get into this temple as well, see it, because the chairman calls himself a historian, so he wants to sort of find out what's in there. While Cere and Eno are in this transport that travels between Ontotho and Phylar, it's just like a big vehicle, essentially, driving through some sort of forest land. They hear some sort of explosion. Cere gets out to explore and kind of runs off. She goes through the forest and hears more things happening and stuff, and then Eno's calling her back, but the force is really weirdly strong on this planet, and it's like, instead of it being difficult to sense things because there's such a little amount of force, it's the opposite. It's described as there's so much force and so much life and energy, and it's almost like sensory overload, where there's so much going on when you try and sense and find your way through the force, it actually kind of blocks it. Which there's other planets to be known which were quite strong in the Force. Dagobah is probably the best example, which was quite strong in the dark side of the Force, which is why there's that cave that Luke goes into in Empire Strikes Back and then fights a version of Vader that is kind of like himself, because the dark side shows visions and things slightly different way to the way the light side does. I don't want to delve too much into that sort of oddness, but just to clarify a bit of trivia for you, Yoda is on Dagobah because it's strong in the dark side, and because of that, in theory, he shouldn't be able to get sensed by Palpatine or any other Force users who are trying specifically to locate him. So that's one of the reasons why Yoda goes to Dagobah. If you want to know more about that, there is an episode of the Clone Wars in Series 6, I believe it is, and Yoda goes to Dagobah and it kind of explains a bit more about that. So while they're kind of looking around the forest and things, Eno kind of stays nearer to the transport than Cere. Cere comes back and Eno's like, don't run off like that, blah, blah, blah. And then the transport explodes. Huge explosion, does a lot of damage, and Cere is knocked down, quite wounded. She kind of gets up and like kind of calling for her master, and then she gets hit in the back of the head with the butt of a gun and is knocked out. So that's how issue 1 ends. I realise now that I forgot to mention the little intro bit at the start. So essentially, I'm going to say what the intro part is for issue number 1, and then I'll also just go straight to the start of issue number 2. So as I said, there's 1 to 3 pages normally at the start of each of these comics, which is meant to be in present day. And that follows the second sister, which is the main antagonist from Fallen Order. And for anyone who's not aware, the brothers or sisters, no one knows who the first brother is as of yet. So there's a second sister, there's a 9th sister, there's quite a lot of them. They're a lot of the people that you fight in Fallen Order. Essentially, the sisters and brothers are part of the Inquisitors. They like to be addressed as Inquisitor and nothing else specifically, unless by their colleagues who are also Inquisitors, they call each other sister or brother. Now, Inquisitors are basically, in Star Wars Rebels is where I think they are mainly. They're in the Vader comics as well quite a bit, but I think that was after they were introduced in Star Wars Rebels, although I may be incorrect in that regard. I'm pretty certain that is the case. Essentially, once the Empire took over, Palpatine and Vader went around trying to find Force-sensitive children, but instead of obviously not turning them into Jedi, they would either kill them or they would try and turn them to the dark side, and then they could become an Inquisitor. So it's basically kind of like Asajj Ventress was in the Clone Wars, almost like a Sith assassin, but they're not strictly stuck to the Sith doctrine. They're basically just Vader trains them up to be using the Force and to be ruthless and stuff, and they go around hunting Jedi, or potentially fighting off certain people who are a bit too much for the Empire, but normally the Empire just throws stormtroopers and things at them, and the Inquisitors almost every time are used just to find Jedi or other Force sensitives, either to bring them back and turn them, or to kill them. The Inquisitors also have normally a squadron of Purge Troopers with them. Purge Troopers also featured in the Fallen Order game. They are essentially stormtroopers that are trained specifically for handling Jedi. They've got weapons that are a bit more useful for it, certain guns, a bit more electricity stuff, certain other... I kind of view them as... They are very similar to, in Rogue One, you see the Death Troopers, which are the black stormtroopers who are following around Orson Krennic quite a bit. They look quite a bit like that. They're basically just kind of elite ones specifically for hunting Jedi that are generally with an Inquisitor. So So in issue 1, the little intro bit, it starts on Ontotho, and essentially there's some stormtroopers fighting off a bit of resistance in some way. The second sister appears, basically says what's happening here, and one of the stormtroopers just says, oh, it's fine, there was just a stormtrooper think he saw something, but that's clearly not happened. He died a little while ago, so we've just kind of left that to rumour, but it's kind of gone a bit mental. So she says, what did he say he saw? And he saw a lightsaber, or so he thought. And she's like, okay, right, ceasefire, stop shooting, I'll go ahead and try and figure this out. The Inquisitors have this type of lightsaber, or a lot of them do, which it's like a circle with a line through it, and the line through is the handle. It's a double-edged blade, and it spins really, really fast, and that's used for deflecting lightsaber bolts and things with ease, without having to do what the Jedi do a lot of the time, which is specifically reflect every single blaster that comes to you. You can basically just make it spin really fast, not dissimilar to how Grievous's lightsabers spin really fast in Revenge of the Sith. So she's got that, she walks towards these things shooting at them, and then the intro of part 1 stops when they say, should we look for survivors? And then someone ignites a blue lightsaber near them. The second intro bit is basically the second sister fighting off this person with a lightsaber, and essentially the second sister kills them pretty fast, but in doing so it is clear that this person with a lightsaber is not a Jedi. At one point they're about to die, they pull out a blaster, and then she's like, well, you're clearly not a Jedi then. Kills them, and then she says, look, I need to find this temple, to her fellow Purge troopers, and that's where the intro-y part stops on issue 2. So issue 2's main story starts with Cere Junda in a cell of some sort, and she's guided by a droid called N3Lo. He basically says, oh, you're awake, starts to explain something, and then she force grabs her, or force pulls her lightsaber, slices open the cell, jumps out, and then it's confronted by a few people. These people are the people of Filari, and she speaks with them. The sort of leader of them is called Narali, and she speaks to Cere and says, we're not your enemy, can you stop your lightsaber please, can we just talk about things? And she's like, well, why do you lock me in a cell and stuff? And then one of the bits I really liked is Narali says, did you try opening the door normally? And Cere kind of turns around, pulls the door slightly, and it was unlocked. So it was quite a funny moment of showing how brash Cere was, especially as a Padawan, just not really thinking and just slicing away out without trying any other options first. And I will just say the droid N3Lo is one of my favourite parts of these comics. One of the selling points for it, I'd say, for any people contemplating getting this. I would say get the game. If you're not planning on playing the game, then this comic won't be as good. But the droid himself is actually very similar to K2SO from Rogue One. That sort of sassiness and things. I really like that in droids. It does make me laugh. It's like the comedic value in a sense. So Narali basically says to Cere that Cordova is dead, and the Ontotho people want to blame the Filari for causing all of these things. So there's clearly some hostilities going on between the Filari in this independent system compared to the main people of Ontotho. Cere then goes to Ontotho City after being told not to. She speaks with the Ontotho Parliament and the DAA chairman, which is the Dilanto Dar. It's either Dar or DAA, it's hard to tell in a comic, but I think it's the DAA Corporation, and then his surname is Dar, so apologies if I keep mixing that up. But she speaks to them, they call security on her, because she's basically throwing these allegations that this chairman, Dilanto Dar, is causing something or playing them, or something like that. Security show up, and then she basically fights her way out. N3Lo goes with Cere, and then they both try to escape, and then Cere just tells N3Lo to run, go back to the Filari, tell them basically I'll be there soon, and then she kind of fends off the security. And for clarity, Cere does not try to harm any of these people. She is being very defensive in a lot of ways. She's like breaks their guns and kind of tries to force push them and sort of incapacitate them rather than, just going around slicing them all with lightsaber. And right at the end of the comic, 3Lo gets back to the Filari and says, I don't know if Cere made it or whatever, I presume she's dead, and then she appears. And I will say, just with 3Lo, I won't say all of his dialogue, I won't even say most of it, I just want to give a little tidbit every now and then of his dialogue, and just one of the reasons I love it. And when Cere and 3Lo are leaving the sort of parliamentary building before they start getting attacked again, she says, just act casual, and he says, I only have one way of acting. And it's that sort of, very much K2SO inspired, I believe. Issue 3's intro with the second sister is not as much to talk about. She basically just gets to this area, Filari, and there's a couple of sort of insurgents in a way. The stormtroopers kill them quite quickly and then say, sorry, all the survivors are dead. We've searched everywhere. We can't find this temple you're looking for. And then the second sister says, we're not looking hard enough. And then it looks like she force pushes some sort of cloud and fog away, and it reveals some steps. Something I forgot to mention was that one of the reasons that the Phylari and the Ontotho are fighting is this temple. I think I said it at the start, but it's become more and more apparent they're basically just fighting purely over this temple or what's inside the temple. So the way issue 3 starts is basically the Ontotho, some of the guards going to this temple in Phylari, and Cere Junda sat at the steps. She says it's not your land, and then calls out to the Phylari to defend themselves, and then they basically dispose of the security guards without killing them. They managed to dispose of, say, the first wave of these security guards and things. Then Cere and a lot of the sort of resistance of Phylari go back to the main woman, Nirali, and they basically say, Cere's like, look, we need to attack them back, because if you don't, they're just going to come to us. While they're deliberating all these things, another explosion happens, and then the second wave come. Cere disposes of the second wave quite easily, along with some help of the remaining Phylari fighters. They basically, once again, are not killing any of the Imperial officers. They are destroying their guns, maybe incapacitating them. There's some droids that are fighting alongside the Ontotho, which all of the droids are basically destroyed. And then Cere basically says, look, I've got a plan, we can figure this out. I need to communicate with the Republic, with the Jedi Council, and I'll get some reinforcements, we'll get this all sorted out. But to do that, I'll need to sneak to Ontotho, because no one in Phylari has any contact with anyone outside in the rest of the universe. They don't have any communication towers or anything to be able to communicate elsewhere. So Cere and Thrilo have to once again go into Ontotho City. While Thrilo is sorting out the comms tower and things, Cere manages to find the chairman, Dylanto Dar, and confronts him, saying, look, you're the reason who's caused all this. You seem to be fine, you attacked me, you did this, that, and the other. And essentially she, holding her lightsaber to him, and then as she goes to attack him, a blue lightsaber stops her blade, and it turns out to be Eno Cordova, who is alive and well. Eno and Cere basically decide to speak with the people they've got more close to, because the Ontotho and Chairman Dar, they've had Eno there as sort of an advisor and been speaking to him and things once his wound healed and whatnot, while Cere has obviously been speaking with the Phylari. And so each Jedi has almost got more in common with the opposite faction and things. They're speaking with them and stuff. So Eno says, right, I'll talk to the Ontotho people, you speak to the Phylari, we'll get them to meet up and we'll try and stop this fighting. So they get them to meet up, and then immediately Nirali of the Phylari and the chairman DAA of Ontotho start yelling at each other and stuff, and Eno says, look, right, let's stop the fighting just for 2 days, we'll come back here and talk about it. And while they do that, Eno says, great, now Cere, let's go check out that temple. While no one's fighting, we can go figure out what everyone is actually fighting for and what's so valuable in this temple. Issue 4, the intro part with the second sister, she goes into the temple that Eno and Cere entered right at the end of the previous comic, and she finds Thrilo crushed under quite a few rocks. He's barely functioning. She turns him back on, and he says, the structure's really unstable. You've gotten us all killed. Oh, wait, I must be malfunctioning. What's happening? And the second sister says, who got you all killed? And then Thrilo says, who do you think? The ones who caused all of this? The Jedi. And then it goes back to when Cere and Eno were approaching the temple. Eno tells Cere to wait outside while he goes in and explores and things. He's a massive, massive historian, basically a history nerd. He loves ancient civilizations and temples and things, so he goes in there and he says, oh, this is actually really, is even larger on the inside than it seems to be on the outside, which is quite fascinating and quite cool. And then while Cere's waiting outside impatiently, Thrilo comes up to her and basically asks her what she's doing. She says nothing really, and he's like, okay, that's pretty dull. And then another little exchange I would like to read. She says, do me a favour, Thrilo, to which he says, I'm ill-equipped to process favours, Cere Junda, perhaps, and she says, just forget you saw me. And then as she's running off into the distance, going more into the Jedi Temple, Thrilo calls out, I think you misunderstood. I don't have the ability to actually forget things. That was a figure of speech, Cere Junda. You'll need to manually erase yourself from my memory banks. Which I just think is just that funny, that taking everything really literally and written in a brilliant way. So Eno's in this temple, there's a few booby traps and things that goes off. Cere sneaks in and then overhears a couple of people from Ontotho, some of the security guards and a couple of droids, basically saying, we need to hide those bodies, and then when you find the Jedi, kill them. She takes out the droids that are with the guards, and then one of the guards puts a gun to her back and says, stop, essentially. And then a Tomb Guardian awakens and just punches one of them straight on the back, straight onto the floor. Now, if people haven't played Fallen Order, then they may not know what a Tomb Guardian is, because from what I can tell, they've only appeared thus far in the Fallen Order game and in this comic. The Tomb Guardian is basically something made from the Zepho, the ancient civilization who this temple must be a part of, and essentially it's a really big hulking suit of armour, but it seems to be about 8 or 9 feet tall, and they're powered by this orb in their chest, and they're very, very strong. They can shoot a beam out of their chest. There's like this huge energy beam. They can punch things very, very hard. And while the Tomb Guardians are attacking, Cere Junda's trying to sort of defend against them, trying to stop them attacking and things. One of the guards seems to get killed while the other one is still there. She's trying to defend this one last guard who's pretty useless in the situation, but he keeps trying to attack her. He pulls out a gun and says, "Die, Jedi," and she's like, "Look behind you, there's a Tomb Guardian." And then he starts to run away and things, and then she's like, "Wait, no, there's more traps, you should go out the way you came in, don't run any further in." And then he ends up throwing a smoke grenade at her with like toxic gas and stuff, and she's yelling at him saying, "You're going to get us both killed" and things. She tries to open this door that she can't quite get through. This smoke grenade this idiot has thrown off is starting to have its effect on both Cere and him. She's almost through the door, collapses due to the smoke, and then Eno Cordova lifts up the door, gets her out. There's a bit here I want to read from Eno, which is quite an interesting thing, where he basically says, that's very close. Over the years, I've learned to recognise the chaotic clatter that comes from Cere Junda not listening to me. And then she was like, "Well, DAA sent in these troops to kill you." And he was like, I worried that was going to happen, but you should have waited outside. And she's like, "You don't care I may have even saved your life." And he says, "Might have. And yet I saved you, and nobody saved them. What of the Phylari guards outside? I doubt DAA's forces sneak past them like you did, and who was there to save them? You aren't here to watch over me, Cere, nor are you. We're here to protect the people of this planet, ideally not from each other." Which I found that was quite interesting. Well, obviously it's that whole Padawan, the young person, inexperienced, not quite ready and wanting to get into the action, save their master and do all these things without actually listening to what the master's saying and not believing it fully. When he says that, she kind of, understands a little bit more, but then also says that that man, the guard, essentially would have tried to kill her instead of saving them both, which she felt a bit odd about. But then Eno and her have a more conversation and basically say that it's this temple that's causing all this massive conflict very clearly. DAA send this massive army, Cere and the chairman of the DAA start talking and things, and then this big army sort of starts shooting on the Phylari and Cere, while Cere's sort of defending and things. Basically what Ruairí says is, we need to get into the temple and get that thing, and then one of her colleagues essentially is like, "Well, don't say what's in the temple and things like that," and Cere's like, "What is in the temple?" And they're like, "Don't say it, she'll betray us" and stuff. So clearly hiding that there's something else in the temple that we're not yet aware of. Ruairí sneaks into the temple and Eno Cordova's there, basically taking some information of the stuff within this Zeffo temple, not knowing it's Zeffo, not really knowing what it is. There's just this ancient language he can't really figure out. He gets out a data pad, tries to sort of take note of a lot of these things and starts to say, maybe it can be translated if I could send it back to the council. And then he gets shocked in the back by Ruairí, the leader of the Phylari, saying, "I can't let anything get in my way, I'm sorry." And then on to the final comic. As I said at the start, the final comic does not actually start with the second sister intro-y bit. That's actually right at the end. So Cere manages to get through the army. She gets to DAA. He's hiding in this command center that's like an armored thing towards the back. She says to him that she will let him have access to the Jedi archives as well as the temple if he can stop the fighting. He says, "Can you even do that with the Jedi archives?" And she's like, "I don't know. I'll give it a go," because the Jedi archives are not allowed to be read by anyone who isn't a Jedi. Once he accepts, he then says that Phylar is no longer recognised as an independent nation by the Republic, so then it means that he can basically go in there, grab the temple, and is not in breach of anything. He also says that explosion that was in the first comic, which in the convoy that kind of started all of this, he said it was actually caused by some hired local security. So DAA hired some local security that were actually Phylari people. They were the ones who started the whole feud because there's been this war going on between the Ontotho and the Phylari for generations and generations, and a lot of them want the war to get reignited so they can get back at the other side. Once this has been agreed, Chairman Dar and Cere go outside, and the chairman says, "Look, I believe you, you've convinced me to stop fighting. If you can go speak to the Phylari and convince them, then this will solve all the problems." He then gets shot by this big energy beam thing right through the centre of the chest, and it turns out that the Phylari have now got all these crazy weapons that shoot out like lightning beams, very similar to what you see the Tomb Guardian shooting out of the sort of sphere thing in his chest. One of the beams gets shot at Cere. She manages to deflect it with a lightsaber, but she gets pushed back really far onto the floor. And then she sees some ships coming down, and then she sees Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi Masters. Mace Windu says that he managed to convince the DA to stop fighting and things, but obviously Phylari didn't get the message, so now they need to kind of neutralise the situation. Just for a little bit of clarity, the 3 Jedi Masters with Mace, one of them was Luminara, and she is in the Clone Wars a fair amount. I think you can actually see her in Attack of the Clones as well. She's green-skinned, and just looks like a human, so that's quite simple. The other two Jedi, one of them is called Odu, and the other one is called Maslow Scaff. Maslow Scaff is Salust, the species of Salust. The most famous one would be Nyan Nub, which the name may not be recognised, but if you watch, I can't remember if he's in Empire, but I know he's in Return of the Jedi. And in Return of the Jedi, when Lando's flying the Falcon to destroy the second Death Star, there's that monkey-looking person who makes the weird noises like and his bottom jaw looks like it's all wet and things. That is a Salust. That's the species that it is. The other one, which is Odu, is an Ithorian. I mentioned Ithorians in one of the last comic things, but they're kind of hard to describe. They've kind of got a weird flat head, almost like a hammerhead shark in some ways, and they've got mouths on the side that looks like their necks. They're quite an odd thing, but you will have probably seen an Ithorian because they're in quite a lot of Star Wars things. They're just kind of hard to describe. So the Ithorian Jedi goes with Cere to try and get Cordova and leave, while Mace Luminara and Maslow Scaff go out and try and neutralise the war. As Cere and Odu get into the temple, they find Cordova, speak to him, and then this big energy shield goes around them, very similar to ray shields. Narali comes out and says, "You walked into my trap, you'll just have to get stuck here because we need to fight this battle, we can't let anyone else get involved." So she gets Threelo to basically put one of those toxic gas canister things that was in the last comic inside the ray shield energy field and leaves it in there. While this is happening, Narali goes out and tells the rest of the Phylari to shoot at this Republic vessel. One of them's like, "I don't think that's a good idea," and she's like, "Look, we need to get rid of them now. If we can get rid of these 100, then the thousands won't come back." So they shoot down one of the ships, and in the meantime, Cere, Eno, and Odu in this energy shield thing are trying to work out how to get out, and then Eno manages to lift up a rock with the Force, hit a Tomb Guardian with it, and then these Tomb Guardians start smashing on this ray shield energy ball thing, and eventually the thing breaks. As they're just about to escape, this big beam gets shot down from one of the Republic vessels, because where one of the Republic ships got shot down by the Phylari, the other ones aren't, and then start shooting as a counterattack. One of the beams goes into the temple and blows up a lot of these energy sphere things, which were powering the Guardians, which were seemingly powering the weapons as well that the Phylari were using, and causes this chain reaction, and the whole of the temple starts to explode. Cere, Odu, and Eno manage to escape. They're just running down the stairs, and then Odu falls off the edge by an explosion, and he seemingly falls to his death. As they're escaping, the Phylari leader, Narali, who basically tried to kill them, is there. An explosion shoots a rock right at her. Cere stops the rock, puts it down, and then she's like, "Why did you save me? I thought we were enemies." And Cere was like, "We were never enemies. I've been trying to solve this whole thing the whole time. I'm not trying to cause any fighting. I just wanted to check out this temple with my master, and then we got wrapped into this whole thing." The Republic ships are there and say, "Look, we need to get these guys out because this chain reaction is still going on. This whole area is going to explode. Most of Phylari is going to be destroyed if we can't get out quickly." And Narali says, "Look, I'm staying behind. Even if it means certain death, I'm not joining with the Republic. That's that." Cere and Eno get picked up by the ship, it flies away, and then it explodes, assumedly killing all of them. There's a few Phylari that were on the Republic ship. There are some survivors that were rounded up by Mace and the rest of the Jedi, so the Phylari aren't completely extinct, but most of them are, and their home area is gone. A few days later, Cere then speaks with the Jedi Council. They promote her to Jedi. They say that the efforts that she did were amazing. They spoke to some of the Phylari refugees and things that they're relocating, and some of the other people who are involved in that conflict. They all say that Cere was really helpful and was really wise and was doing everything a Jedi should do. So she gets promoted from a Padawan to the Jedi Knight. And then Eno basically says, "Look, I want to spend most of my time in the archives. I've realised I don't really want to be out adventuring and having to fight wars and do all these crazy things. I'd rather stay in the archives and then maybe do a bit of exploring after that." And then the comic ends with the flash forward with the second sister, and essentially she manages to find this data pad that Cordova had earlier on in the fourth comic before he got stunned when he was making some notes and things. She picks it up and reads it and things and sees it as Eno Cordova's, and then realises exactly what to do next, and she says, "It's time to depart. We need to head for the planet Bogano at once. Cere, Junda, and Cal Kestis cannot hide from me forever." And just for clarity, in the game Fallen Order, Bogano is, I think, the first place that you go properly, and you find BD1 there, and that's kind of where the intro of the game kind of happens. You have the intro in this like Imperial rig place, but then the first proper level is Bogano. And when you're on Bogano, at some point, I think it's when you go there the second time, the Empire then attacks, and it's not really abundantly clear how they knew you were there. This comic explains that because the second sister found Eno Cordova's datapad looking around a temple that is now known to be Zepho, she thinks Okay, well, they might be in one of the other Zepho temples, and the other Zepho temple that is known to the Empire is on Bogano. So that's how that happens. And that, my friends, is how this comic ends. I really hope you enjoyed this. It is a really cool comic. As I say at the end of pretty much all of these, I almost always avoid talking about the action scenes and things because I want you guys to pick up these comics. I want you to support the authors and keep these comics going because they're a lot of fun. They're really, really cool reads. And they do add things to the universe. This whole guide is meant to be so if you don't have time, money, or enough interest to sit there and read 5 comics, you can listen to this and it gives you a nice summary of the things that happened and some of the connections with it. But if you go back and read it, there was a lot of dialogue I missed out. There was some extra little plot points and things that I did miss out. But all of those things didn't add specifically to the big main story. And obviously I didn't describe all the action scenes because I'm not just going to sit here and try and read out what's happening in a comic while ships are flying around and crazy lightsaber acrobatics are happening. Because it's not very fun for me to try and explain. And it wouldn't be very fun for me to explain to you guys either, for you listening. So recommend reading the comic. It's a lot of fun. As I said, it is a really good comic for Fallen Order. It goes very well with that. If you haven't played Fallen Order or don't have any intention to play Fallen Order, I'd probably lean against this one because it is so linked with that. But it is a cool one if you're interested in sort of archaeology and some of the Jedi that are a lot more interested in other things. And just to clarify, next week I am going to be continuing the main run of Star Wars comics description, which is set between episodes 4 and 5 with Luke, Han, Leia and Chewie. And I spoke about the first arc, Skywalker Strikes, which is when Vader finds out how the pilot of the Death Star, what his last name was. Obviously it's Skywalker, so how Vader found out Luke, his son, was alive. And then also it gives a bit of information about Boba Fett and stuff, which was really cool. So next week is going to be the next story arc of this. And for clarity, I think there's like 10 to 13 full arcs of the mainline Star Wars comic. So once a month I'll be doing that, while the other 3 weeks of the month will be just variant bits, mainly miniseries it seems. So that's about it from me, guys, then. As I said, thank you so much for listening. I've got my other podcast, Genuine Chit-Chat, which I always speak about at the end. I have different guests each week. The episode that should be coming out probably the day after this one's been released will be with Chris and Dave of Comics in Motion. Obviously, Comics in Motion should be where you're listening to this podcast right now. And so if you're interested in listening to Chris and Dave talk to me about how I started Star Wars comics in Canon, as well as Indie Comic Spotlight and Mandatory Marvel and DC, done by Tony Farina and Max Byrne, also on this feed, then make sure you check that episode out. And that's it from me, guys. So thank you so much for listening, and may the Force be with you.